refugees in the Near East. I declare open the 2024 meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee of the General Assembly for the announcement of voluntary contributions to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I extend a warm welcome to all of you joining us today. I recognize in particular the presence here on the podium of the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, Mr. Philip Lazzarini, and the Chef de Cabinet in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, Mr. Earl Courtney Rattray. I now have the honor to give the floor to the Secretary General.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, every year we meet to help bridge the gap between what is pledged to UNRWA and what is needed. This year is different. Yes, we face a profound funding gap, but Palestinians are seeing widening gaps across the board. Gaps in respect for international humanitarian law, gaps in recognition of universal human rights and dignity for all. And for Palestinians in Gaza, not just a gap, but death, destruction, and a total breakdown in law and order. Just when we thought it couldn't get any worse in Gaza, somehow, appallingly, civilians are being pushed into ever deeper circles of hell. Recent days have brought yet more evacuation orders by Israeli authorities, yet more civilian suffering, and yet more bloodshed. Palestinians in Gaza keep being forced to move like human pinballs across a landscape of destruction and death. The extreme level of fighting and devastation is incomprehensible and inexcusable, and the level of chaos is affecting every Palestinian in Gaza and all those desperately trying to get aid to them. Nowhere is safe. Everywhere is a potential killing zone. It is high time for the parties to show the political courage and political will to finally reach a deal. Excellencies, nothing justifies the horrific attacks by Hamas on October the 7th, and nothing justifies the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Yet Palestinians, including of course Palestine refugees, are enduring the deadliest period since the agency's creation. And we are all painfully aware the horror has not spared UNRWA colleagues. 195 UNRWA staff members have been killed, the highest staff death toll in UN history. And many of them were killed together with their families and loved ones. And UNRWA is also being targeted in other ways. Staff have been subject to increasingly violent protests and virulent misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Some have been detained by Israeli security forces and subsequently reported mistreatment and even torture. In the occupied West Bank, the presence and movements of UNRWA personnel have been severely restricted by Israeli authorities. Yet, despite these and other obstacles, in impossible conditions, and in the midst of their own grief, the women and men of UNRWA have bravely continued their work in whatever way they can. They are the backbone of humanitarian operations in Gaza. And can you imagine what it must be like to be in this situation? Can you imagine how our colleagues wake up day after day in a living nightmare and still deliver for Palestinians in desperate need? Because I cannot. They are doctors, nurses, counselors, engineers, drivers, and so many others, all demonstrating incredible courage and solidarity. And they are continuing to deliver UNRWA's mandate in desperate circumstances in Gaza, while UNRWA also strives to deliver in an increasingly challenging situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, championing human development and human rights. Excellencies, hopelessness is the greatest ally of instability, and the work of UNRWA is one of the greatest factors providing hope and stability across a troubled region. Without the necessary support and financing to UNRWA, Palestine refugees will lose a critical lifeline and the last ray of hope for a better future. To those of you who have already pledged support, I thank you. And my appeal to everyone is this: protect UNRWA, protect UNRWA's staff, and protect UNRWA's mandate, including through funding. And let me be clear, there is no alternative to UNRWA. We are working on all fronts to implement the recommendations of the Catherine Colonna report by strengthening UNRWA's work and risk management mechanisms. Now is also the time to work on all fronts to support UNRWA's critical mission. And now is the time to bring an end to this terrible war, starting with an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza and an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Ultimately, only a political solution can bring an end to this conflict, one that realizes a vision of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I urge you to act, and act now, and to instill hope in a place where it is in short supply. Act to uphold the mandate of this General Assembly to sustain UNRWA. Act in solidarity with the Palestine refugees and all the Palestinian people, and I thank you.
I should like to thank the Secretary General for his statement, and I will now make some remarks of my own. Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of UNRWA, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as President of the General Assembly, I have consistently emphasized that the work and impact of the United Nations extends far beyond the physical confines of our headquarters in New York. Our field offices save innumerable lives and work diligently to improve the quality of life for millions, giving them hope. Our United Nations system organizations provide shelter to displaced refugees, sustenance to the hungry, and education to children who would otherwise lack access to learning opportunities. Since its establishment in 1949, UNRWA has embodied the best of our field work for decades, earning a reputation as a beacon of hope in a region routinely beset by turmoil. UNRWA provides protection for 5.9 million registered refugees, including vulnerable groups such as women, children, and persons with disabilities. The agency administers 58 recognized Palestine refugee camps, addressing the dire humanitarian needs of over 1.6 million people across Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Through its efforts, UNRWA offers hope and, moreover, the prospect of a future where the dignity and rights of all Palestinian refugees are protected and upheld. Tragically, 197 UNRWA staff members have paid the ultimate price. To honor their memory and the memory of all those who have lost their lives, I kindly request this assembly to rise and observe a minute of silence. Thank you. Excellencies, considering the essential services delivered by the agency and its staff, it should deeply alarm us all that UNRWA is currently standing on the precipice of financial collapse. We must heed Commissioner General Lazarini's persistent warnings, reiterated over the past many months, that the budgetary shortfalls facing the organization could force it to cease operations this year, despite its mandate extending to June 2026. The crisis facing UNRWA has been exacerbated by increasingly persistent attacks on the agency's reputation and integrity. Yet, if it ceases operations, it is vulnerable Palestinian refugees who have nowhere else to turn who will suffer the most. Consider that UNRWA's emergency appeals are critically underfunded, currently at only 18 to 19%. This funding will only cover food supplies for Gazans until the end of September. Throughout this season, we have convened multiple times to address the acute situation affecting UNRWA. In March, the General Assembly held an informal plenary to receive a briefing from Commissioner General Lazzarini on the agency's operations. A number of permanent representatives actively participated in the morning GAIAP dialogues, which I convened to shine a spotlight on this disturbing situation. These efforts have aimed at building political support for UNRWA. Today, however, we must match our political commitment with substantial financial contributions. As custodian of UNRWA's mandate, I firmly believe that the General Assembly has a duty to ensure that the agency and its staff and the millions of refugees it serves receive adequate and enduring support, both political and financial, in order to empower it to discharge its mandate. Excellencies, UNRWA is no stranger to crisis. Throughout its history, it has often operated amidst armed conflict. However, the current levels of death and destruction in the Gaza Strip are on an unprecedented scale. At least 38,000 Palestinians have been killed and over 85,000 are injured. More than 90% of the Gaza Strip's population is displaced, with nowhere safe to turn. The territory is grappling with severe acute food insecurity, with 500,000 people on the brink of famine. In an age of such food wastage, the mere existence of a famine, especially one that is human-caused and conflict-induced, is unconscionable and inexcusable. UNRWA has continued to operate throughout this turmoil, albeit at severely limited capacity. Its shelters have been hit, its schools destroyed, and its healthcare facilities severely impacted. Yet UNRWA and its staff has courageously persevered, delivering basic and life-saving assistance and support to the increasingly desperate people of Gaza Strip. In these extraordinary times, where UNRWA's very existence is in jeopardy, we must acknowledge that this pledging conference cannot proceed on the basis of business as usual. Therefore, I address the global public directly. Now more than ever, UNRWA needs your support. Philanthropic organizations, the private sector, and individuals, you all have the collective power to dig deeper into your pockets and to make a profound difference in the lives of millions by contributing directly to UNRWA. I strongly urge you to act and to do so with utmost urgency. This year must be different. Humanitarian needs are escalating, and our actions must rise to meet them. We must transform rhetoric into reality, ensuring that UNRWA stands on a stable financial footing. And we must relentlessly pursue peace in the region and end the violence in the Gaza Strip. Dear colleagues, I unreservedly reiterate the demands of the international community, as expressed through the General Assembly in its emergency special sessions, which include: 1. An immediate and lasting humanitarian ceasefire. 2. Adherence to international law by all parties. 3. Facilitation of immediate humanitarian access, including the lifting of restrictions placed on humanitarian actors by Israel. And 4. The unconditional and immediate release of all hostages. I call on all those with leverage over the parties to exert their influence to achieve these aims. Ultimately, a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East through the two-state solution must be realized. As the President of the General Assembly, I reiterate my unwavering commitment to support any and all efforts to this end. Excellencies, dear friends, I end by urging not only member states of this Assembly, but all other stakeholders I addressed an open message this week, including philanthropic organizations, the private sector, and individuals inviting your contributions. This is not merely about funding, nor about the survival of an agency. It is about people and the survival of Palestine refugees, especially the children across the Gaza Strip, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Together we must forge a sustainable path forward that honors our shared humanity, conscience, and collective mandate to deliver both on our humanitarian obligations and indeed on our human imperatives to help and to heal. I thank you. I now give the floor to the Commissioner General for UNRWA, Mr. Philip Lazzarini.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly for convening this conference. I'm also grateful to the Secretary General for his presence and strong support to UNRWA at an exceptionally challenging time. When we met for the pledging conference last June, no one could have foreseen the tragedy that would engulf Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians and Israelis have experienced terrible losses and immense suffering. I echo the call of the Secretary General for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Gaza is decimated. More than 2 million people are trapped in a living hell. They have been displaced repeatedly across the ravaged and increasingly lawless territory. Children and women are bearing the brunt of this brutal war. Acute food insecurity is claiming the lives of children and severely affecting women who often eat last and least. Thousands of children have been killed. Thousands more are struggling with new disabilities. Many have lost their limbs to amputation, their hearing to blasts, and their speech to shock and trauma. In the shadow of Gaza, another tragedy is unfolding in the West Bank. More than 500 Palestinians have been killed since October, including at least 130 children. Attacks by Israeli settlers, military incursions, and the destruction of homes and critical infrastructure are part of a system of oppression. The Israel-Lebanon border is simmering, threatening full-blown war. Millions of Palestinian refugees across the region are anxious and afraid. Most have lived in camps for generations, awaiting a political solution to their plight. Palestinians are witnessing today the greatest tragedy since 1948. And as they have done for 75 years, they are looking to UNRWA for help. Mr. President, for decades the agency has been a force for stability across the region. It is a driver of human development for Palestinian refugees, providing public-like services such as education and healthcare. Today, however, UNRWA is staggering under the weight of relentless attacks. In Gaza, the agency has paid a terrible price. 195 of our colleagues have been killed. Nearly 190 installations have been damaged or destroyed, killing more than 500 people seeking United Nations protection. UNRWA personnel detained by the Israeli forces have reported mistreatment and torture. Our premises have been used for military purposes by Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas and the Israeli forces. Our convoys have come under attack despite coordinating movement. In the West Bank, UNRWA's operational space is shrinking. Arbitrary measures imposed by Israel severely restrict the presence and movement of our staff. Violent protests outside our premises in East Jerusalem culminated in arson attacks. In more than 30 years of humanitarian work, I have never encountered such blatant disregard for the protected status of humanitarian workers, facilities, and operations under international law. Turning a blind eye to this attack sets a dangerous precedent, undermining respect for the rules-based international order in other conflicts. Excellencies, efforts are on the way to dismantle UNRWA and change the established political parameters for peace in the occupied Palestinian territory. This includes fierce attacks on social media and legislative proposal to evict the agency from its premises in East Jerusalem and to label it as a terrorist organization. UNRWA is targeted because of its role in safeguarding the right of Palestinian refugees and because it embodies an international commitment to a political solution. Failing to push back will leave other UN entities and international organizations exposed to similar attack. Mr. President, amid these extraordinary challenges, I received serious allegations that UNRWA personnel in Gaza were involved in the horrific attacks of October 7. If proved true, this would constitute an appalling betrayal of Palestinian refugees and UNRWA. But the United Nations took firm and immediate action. I terminated the appointment of the accused individuals. The Office of Internal Oversight Services, OIOS, opened an investigation, and the Secretary General launched an independent review of how UNRWA upholds neutrality in its work. The OIOS investigation into allegations against individuals is ongoing. The independent review concluded that UNRWA has policies, mechanisms, and procedures to ensure compliance with the principle of neutrality. The review confirmed that the agency has a more developed approach to neutrality than similar UN or other entities, including in addressing breaches through disciplinary sanction. The review, however, makes recommendations to reinforce neutrality in a complex and polarized political environment. UNRWA is committed to implementing this recommendation with the support of donors and host countries. Excellencies, I have warned repeatedly that UNRWA's funding model is incompatible with its mandate to provide public-like services. More than a decade of crowning underfunding and severe austerity measures have eroded the quality of our services. Weakened by snowballing financial deficits, the agency nearly imploded earlier this year. Following the allegation against individual personnel, 16 member states suspended funding to the agency. We have worked tirelessly with partners to restore confidence in the agency. As of today, almost all have resumed funding. I am immensely grateful for your trust and support. However, the fundamental fiscal challenge remains. UNRWA lacks the resource to deliver its mandate. The agency's ability to operate beyond August depends on member states disbursing planned funding and making new contributions to the core budget. For the occupied Palestinian territory emergency appeal, driven primarily by the war in Gaza, we are appealing for $1.2 billion to cover critical humanitarian needs until the end of the year. This appeal and the emergency appeal for Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan are less than 20% funded. Mr. President, UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza. The agency will remain critical for the transition from ceasefire to day after, providing essential services, notably primary health care and education. Before the war, UNRWA met 70 to 80% of primary health care needs in Gaza. Our extensive network and relationship of trust with the community allow us to rapidly introduce and scale up critical services such as mental health and trauma care. Education is also a priority in Gaza, where every second person is a child. Palestinians value education highly. It has been the only investment from which they could not be dispossessed. More than 625,000 deeply traumatized children are out of schools. Half went to UNRWA schools before the war. Today, they spend the day scavenging in the rubble and waiting to collect water in blistering heat. They are at risk of violence and exploitation, including recruitment by armed groups. If we fail to bring them back to learning, we will lose an entire generation and sow the seeds of hatred, resentment, and future conflict. UNRWA can provide education for all children in Gaza when the security situation allows. And together with partners, we are already rolling out a plan to resume learning. It starts with providing mental health and psychosocial support, transition to teaching, reading, writing and math in informal setting, and culminates in a return to formal education in schools. Excellencies, UNRWA was created 75 years ago as a temporary agency pending a political answer to the question of Palestine. The agency exists today because a political solution does not. It exists in lieu of a state that can deliver critical public services. If the international community commits to a political solution, UNRWA can resume its intended role supporting a time-bound transition, delivering education, primary health and social support. Let me conclude with 3 requests. First, I urge you to safeguard UNRWA now and within the framework of a transition. And here I would like to thank the 118 member states who have signed up on the shared commitment to support the agency, as it was shown this morning. The notion that the agency can be dismantled without triggering the collapse of the humanitarian response in Gaza and causing chaos in other areas of operation is naive at best. UNRWA must continue providing services until a political solution is at hand. Second, we must scale up and enhance service delivery to Palestinian refugees. In Gaza, we need an immediate ceasefire and safe, unfettered access to delivery aid at scale. We also need strong partnership that complement and preserve UNRWA's mandate. The mandate must be matched by adequate, predictable and flexible funding from member states. Finally, I seek your support to implement the recommendation of the independent review on neutrality. Upholding neutrality is a shared responsibility. To succeed, we need financial and in-kind support from member states. In closing, I must reiterate that the world has changed drastically since we last met. UNRWA is under greater pressure than ever before. If we maintain the status quo, the agency will crumble and millions of children, women and men will pay a heavy price. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is it ready? Now there will be a 3.5-minute video on UNRWA's operations.
Good morning. I'm speaking to you from our house after our home was shelled. I apologize. I did not sleep well. We were being bombed all night and we couldn't sleep, and we hope that the future nights will be better. We don't have any water, and we haven't had any water in over a week. Hamoud, Mariam, where are you? Let us see how our day will be. As you see, there's destruction everywhere. Here's Hamoud. How are you? I hope all is well. I have a favor to ask you. When there's water, we will fill it up. And now I have to work. Are you ready? Give me a high five. I'm going to work today at a junior high school. Good morning.
يا شباب يعطيكم العافية سيلفي اليوم لكل البركة. السلام عليكم، يعطيكم العافية جميعا. طبعا حنشوف مع بعض الأنشطة اللي بينفذوها المرشدين النفسيين داخل مراكز الإيواء مع بعض زي ما انتم شايفين. الحين عندنا محمد، شايفين محمد؟ وين محمد؟ أشروا عليه. هي محمد. الحين أنا ومحمد بدنا نغير الأماكن تبعتنا، أنا بدي أروح مكان محمد ومحمد بده يجي مكاني. جاهزين؟ جاهزين؟ بدنا نعمل إيش مع بعض؟ عاليا، 1 2 3، عاليا لفوق. روح يا محمد مكاني. هوبا نزل أسفل، أشوف وين محمد. 1 2 3، هوبا. أعلى 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 أعلى. مين فاز؟ مين فاز؟
اثنين بدناش نسقف عليهم، احمر واصفر. يلا ابيض ازرق احمر.
زي ما انتم شايفين هاي الانشطه بنطبقها بشكل يومي مع الاطفال داخل مراكز الايواء.
I should like to thank the Commissioner General of UNRWA for his statement and for the video just shown. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, before I open the floor, no, he's not leaving. I would like to invite all delegations to complete and sign the pledge forms on their desks. These forms should later be submitted to the conference officers at the back of the conference room near the entrance. I would also like to inform delegations of the time limits of 3 minutes for statements in the national capacity and 5 minutes for statements on behalf of a group of states in keeping with past practice. Speakers are encouraged to adhere to this time limit to enable us to hear from as many delegations as possible in the limited time available for this meeting. Speakers are therefore further encouraged to deliver summarized versions of their statements and to submit the full text to e-statements@un.org in order to facilitate the work of the interpreters. Submitted statements will also be uploaded to the Journal of the United Nations as part of the official record of this meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I have received a request from the observer state of Palestine to make a statement at this stage, and I hereby grant this request. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the observer state of Palestine.
Mr. President, Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, Excellencies, I'm honored to address you today at this annual pledging conference for UNRWA, 75 years after UNRWA's establishment by the General Assembly in 1949. The plight of the Palestine refugees continues. It is a grave injustice that their plight, which began over 76 years ago when Palestinian children, women, and men were violently expelled and uprooted from their homes, villages, towns, cities, from their homeland in the Nakba in 1948, has continued over time, deteriorating in these days to unprecedented levels as this Nakba carries on with no end in sight. They endured untold hardships and indignities, one crisis after the next, dispossessed and displaced and denied their rights, including to return and to just compensation and reparations for their losses and suffering. In Gaza, refugees who were left to languish under blockade for nearly 2 decades face today an existential crisis threatening not only their liability to cope, but their very survival. It has been a long, painful, harrowing 9 months. There is nowhere safe for our refugees to turn in Gaza, as the Secretary General has indicated, not even under the UN flag, as UNRWA schools continue to be targeted and bombed by the Israeli occupying forces in one attack after another, adding to the casualties, destruction, and the traumas forced upon our people. 40,000 Palestinian children, women, and men were killed, with estimates that the number are in reality infinitely higher. 87,000 injured, many disabled permanently, creating most likely the largest ever cohort of amputees in an armed conflict. Hundreds of humanitarian personnel, health workers, and journalists killed, of them nearly 200 UNRWA staff, and 80% of homes and infrastructure destroyed, including UNRWA schools, sheltering nearly 2 million displaced, hospitals, and all other essentials of life. Israel is attempting to destroy all the conditions for life in Gaza. It has used starvation and dehydration as weapons of war and desperately needed aid, including food, water, and medicine, as a bargaining chip, denying and obstructing humanitarian access and attacking the blockade of the UN's humanitarian efforts. UNRWA, in a libelous campaign, publicly waging war not just on the agency but on the UN as a whole, and clearly aiming to bring UNRWA to collapse, to deny Palestine refugees this lifeline, to deny them any form of support and protection, to continue denying them their fundamental rights. These 9 months have shaken our faith in humanity and in the international laws created to protect human life and ensure the safety, dignity, and needs of civilians in armed conflict worldwide. Palestinians are not lesser human beings. They are entitled to the same rights, to the same respect, to the same consideration. Their lives are not less valuable or less worthy of protection. We also agree with all of you that what we need is an immediate ceasefire in Gaza must be enforced now and not to delay any further. This injustice must be brought to an end. We must restore humanity. We must uphold the rules that protect it and hold accountable those breaching them. The Palestinian people must live. The Palestinian people must be free. And peace must be achieved. Until then, UNRWA remains a permanent responsibility of the international community and remains a lifeline for the Palestinian refugees. It also makes a significant contribution to regional stability that must be preserved. That is why, despite our distress and the agony our people endure, we are heartened by the shared commitments on UNRWA launched by Slovenia, Jordan, and Kuwait, and to which all members of the Security Council, present and incoming, have subscribed, alongside 118 other states, and the number is increasing from across the globe. These commitments are a clear signal of the global support UNRWA enjoys, given its vital role and mandate. This political support to UNRWA must be backed with the necessary financial support. We are grateful to all donors for the generous funding they provided over the years and are providing now to UNRWA in these gravest of times. We urge all those who have not yet resumed funding to do so urgently and encourage new donors to come forward. Your funding means schools for children, health care for young and old, food and emergency care for the most vulnerable and needy. It will make the difference between life and death, between a dignified existence or unbearable misery for millions pending a just solution for their plight. We are deeply grateful to the Secretary General for his leadership and advocacy on behalf of UNRWA and the Palestine refugees. We also thank Commissioner General Lazzarini for his leadership in this time of crisis and renew our appreciation to all UNRWA staff, Palestinian and international, for their tireless dedication and efforts in the face of great danger to their own lives. We solemnly pay tribute to all UNRWA personnel killed in Gaza these past months, many along with their families. We grieve their loss and reiterate our calls for accountability for these killings and for the attacks on and destruction of UNRWA facilities. There must be justice for all the victims. In closing, we reiterate our deep gratitude to the host countries for hosting the Palestine refugees all these decades and for their cooperation and support to UNRWA, to all the donors to the agency, with an appeal for increased funding by any who are able to support both core services and emergency appeals, to the members of the Advisory Commission and the Working Group on the financing of UNRWA for their efforts, and to all countries that have joined the shared commitments with an appeal for collective efforts to ensure they are fulfilled. Lastly, I wish to recognize and salute the steadfastness and resilience of the Palestine refugees in spite of all the hardships. You saw the film of UNRWA in Gaza. We are resilient people. We cannot be broken. Tragedy and losses they have borne. We must continue all efforts to ensure to them the needed humanitarian assistance, but also the hope that the nightmare they are enduring will soon end, that a better future is near, and that justice will be realized. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine. And I now give the floor to Her Excellency Tanja Fajon, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Commissioner General. I want to start by expressing my condolences over the death of almost 200 UNRWA staff members. We mourn their lives, which were dedicated to public service and to assisting people in Gaza. Today, my statement is focused on the stories that UNRWA has written so far, and our opportunity to write many more. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting today to celebrate the work of an organization that has helped generations of Palestinian refugees. It did not merely help them to survive, but it helped them to thrive. UNRWA students were reaching for the stars, becoming a NASA engineer, a published author, or a doctor. During their summer games organized by UNRWA, children in Gaza broke several Guinness records. UNRWA is about creating better lives for people beyond the state of Palestine. People like Alia, who works as a phone operator at a vocational center in Oman, and as an Arabic teacher overcoming the challenges of living with blindness. Or Hanan from Damascus, who launched her enterprise in war-torn Syria after receiving a microloan from UNRWA. To fully understand the role of the agency, one must hear about the countless stories it had helped to write for decades. These are accounts of individual successes of Palestinian refugees, but also the stories of this organization and its membership. It is an everyday contribution of the collective membership towards creating opportunities on the ground. We often repeat, UNRWA is a lifeline for generations of Palestine refugees in Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. It is part of the social fabric in its areas of operation and a factor of stability for the region, which faces a multitude of tensions at this moment. Slovenia believes that UNRWA itself, as a pillar of stability, must be further strengthened to address these challenges. I am therefore proud to announce Slovenia's latest contribution to the work of the agency in the amount of €1 million. This donation brings our this year's contributions to 30 times our average annual support to the agency. And we call on all other donors, old and new, small and large, to come forward. I hope, Commissioner General, that our contributions today will help the agency continue writing stories of success, especially in the area of education. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the mounting challenges faced by UNRWA, financial, operational and political, we must stand united. We are perplexed by the hostile operational environment in which UNRWA staff are working. We are deeply alarmed by the Israeli legislative proposals and evacuation orders targeting UNRWA. We condemn the violent protests and arsons at their headquarters. Colleagues, we are talking about a UN agency, our agency. I therefore want to express my personal appreciation to over 110 countries who have joined the shared commitments on UNRWA formally presented this morning and initiated by Jordan, Kuwait and my own country, Slovenia. In multilateralism, success can only be achieved with unity portrayed by the countries who joined the initiative. As an expression of strong and united political support, these commitments will serve as a guide in our cooperation with the agency. I want to thank both the Secretary General and Commissioner General for their prompt reactions to the allegations against UNRWA staff in January this year, and we appreciate the swift establishment of relevant mechanisms, including the independent review led by Catherine Colonna, the ongoing investigation and the internal UNRWA proceedings culminating in an action plan to ensure UNRWA's full adherence to the principles of neutrality and independence. In Slovenia we have a saying, in distress you know your friends. And I assure you, we are a friend of UNRWA. We view UNRWA as an agency that embodies the historical responsibility of the collective membership of the United Nations. The work of the agency is mandated by the UN General Assembly, representing a commitment to a just resolution of the Palestinian refugee question. And we envision a future where both our friends, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace and security through a two-state solution. Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner General, for your dedicated work in these tough times.
I should like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia. I understand that the Secretary General has to leave at this time to attend to other urgent matters. On behalf of all delegations, I thank him very much for joining us today to open this important meeting, and we look forward to continued collaboration with him on future pledging conferences. I now suspend the meeting briefly for his departure to enable the Secretariat to rearrange the podium. The meeting is resumed. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Minna Lina Lind, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia.
Thank you very much. Estonia welcomes today's meeting as UNRWA's role is crucial and indispensable. Estonia is extremely concerned about the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, where the situation remains unacceptable, as we have also heard here today. We commend the work of UNRWA's committee staff who continue their work, putting their lives in danger. We condemn the attacks against UNRWA, including its premises in East Jerusalem, and are deeply concerned about the proposals to designate UNRWA, a UN agency, a terrorist organization. We recall the crucial role of UNRWA providing vital services to millions of people in Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, thereby helping promote stability in the region. In this regard, Estonia has joined the shared commitments on UNRWA, and we thank Jordan, Kuwait, and Slovenia for their initiative. Estonia has been a long-term contributor to UNRWA. This includes over €1 million in support to UNRWA's activities since 2020. Estonia has already transferred its regular funding support to UNRWA for 2024 and 2025. In addition, Estonia has more than doubled its humanitarian assistance to the civilians in Gaza in response to the UN flash appeal at the end of 2023 through UNRWA, WFP, and UNICEF. In response to the UN emergency humanitarian appeal in 2024, Estonia has just allocated additional €120,000 to humanitarian aid in Gaza, including €30,000 to UNRWA. The full implementation of the recommendations of the Independent Review Group report, in line with the action plan presented by UNRWA, is essential for our continued cooperation. We underline the importance of UNRWA's efforts to improve its transparency and credible mechanisms to ensure compliance with the humanitarian principles. We will follow UNRWA's progress in implementing the recommendations and preserving the neutrality of UNRWA. We share the concerns about the escalation of the conflict in the region and its potential consequences. Safe, timely, and unhindered humanitarian access needs to be ensured, and humanitarian aid must reach those who are in need. We will continue to work with regional and international partners towards a peace plan and reviving a political process for a two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. And I now invite to the floor Mr. Ossian Smythe, Minister of State with responsibility for communications and the circular economy of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Secretary General Guterres, Commissioner General Lassarini. Thank you very much. The terrible challenges facing Palestinians and UNRWA are key concerns for the Government of Ireland and for Irish people generally. In recent days, our Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister discussed the situation in Gaza, including Israeli military operations at UNRWA facilities with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Spain and Egypt. So I'd like to start by paying tribute to UNRWA's brave staff. It is shocking that since this conflict started, more than 190 of those staff and over 500 people seeking UNRWA's protection in UN facilities have been killed. These facilities enjoy special protections under humanitarian law, and humanitarians can never be targets. UNRWA derives its essential mandate from the General Assembly, which requires it to provide assistance and protection to Palestinian refugees pending a just and lasting solution to their plight. The Colonna report reconfirmed that UNRWA is irreplaceable and it is indispensable to Palestinians' human and economic development. And Ireland, I want to say this, is committed to safeguarding UNRWA's critical role. UNRWA remains the backbone of the humanitarian effort in Gaza, and it is a vital force for stability in the region. Ireland has been unequivocally clear that no other agency can replace UNRWA. UNRWA, as well as the wider UN system, have regrettably become targets for heightened disinformation and accusations in the course of this conflict, and this has emboldened physical attacks on the UN, including recent arson attacks on UNRWA's East Jerusalem headquarters and other ongoing efforts to undermine the agency. We all need to be part of the solution in support of UNRWA's efforts to further strengthen its neutrality mechanisms and wider systems. The Kelowna review showed that UNRWA has a more developed approach, mechanisms and procedures than other agencies to ensure adherence with humanitarian principles. UNRWA has also welcomed and has committed to and is already progressing the report's recommendations, and despite this, in some cases, new resourcing is being made conditional on the agency demonstrating significant progress on implementing those recommendations. Underinvesting now will increase, not decrease, risks for the thousands of lives dependent on UNRWA in Gaza. Underinvesting also undermines preparations for the day in between. If the ceasefire called for a Security Council Resolution 2735 is enacted, it also undermines UNRWA's capacity to support reconstruction, as well as weakening its work to further strengthen its neutrality mechanisms. In 2023, Ireland provided €18 million to UNRWA, tripling our annual commitment, and this February we provided a further €20 million. We welcome the resumption of funding by almost all Member States and the European Commission's payment of €66 million of its planned €82 million for 2024. So we encourage all others to increase their support, to lift remaining suspensions, and to lift restrictions on funding for UNRWA's Gaza programming. We also encourage multi-year funding commitments. We continue to call for an immediate and sustainable humanitarian ceasefire, and we also continue to call for all parties to the conflict to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and for full, safe and unimpeded access of humanitarian aid for the civilian populations. Accountability for all civilian deaths, including those of UNRWA's staff, is essential. UNRWA services will remain vital in all stages of this conflict and throughout the journey towards a lasting and sustainable peace based on the two-state solution. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of State with responsibility for communications and circular economy of Ireland. And I now invite to the floor Mr. Pasi Helman, Under-Secretary of State of Finland.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Commissioner General, Excellencies. I wish to thank UNRWA and its staff for their commitment and tireless efforts to provide desperately needed humanitarian assistance to Gaza, as well as essential services and protection to the Palestine refugees, despite enormous challenges and extremely difficult and dangerous working environment. I also wish to express deep condolences for the loss of civilian life, among them almost 200 UNRWA staff. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic, with health systems close to collapse, high risk of famine looming, etc. We thank UNRWA for the efficient work done both in delivery of aid under severely stretched resources, and also appreciate attempts to diversify its donor base both towards new partner countries and to private sector. Finland is a long-term partner with UNRWA and provides flexible multi-year funding, €5 million annually. Finland has also joined the shared commitments on UNRWA. We underline the vital role UNRWA plays in providing life-saving assistance to generations of Palestine refugees in accordance with its GA mandate. We appreciate UNRWA's close cooperation with the independent review group and the concrete measures to implement its recommendations presented in the action plan. Finland attaches great priority to efficient risk management and oversight. We have also conducted our own risk reviews on all humanitarian organizations we give core funding to, including UNRWA. And based on the results, we are channeling €500,000 this year for strengthening of UNRWA's risk management system. We hope this helps UNRWA to restore its credibility and the trust of its partners in these difficult circumstances. And we urge the Israeli authorities to allow UNRWA to continue carrying out its crucial work in line with its mandate. Finland values the important role of UNRWA in providing services and protection for Palestine refugees. Now, in Gaza, the number of people with disabilities, injuries, and psychological traumas has dramatically increased. We encourage UNRWA to continue its good work in focusing on those in most vulnerable situations. I thank you.
I thank the Undersecretary of State of Finland. And I now invite the distinguished representative of Iceland.
Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is nothing short of horrifying. Tens of thousands of civilians have been killed, including close to 200 UNRWA staff. More than 2 million civilians are in desperate need of life-saving aid. 9 out of 10 have been internally displaced. Access for humanitarian aid, water and power is severely hindered. Civilian infrastructure is in ruins. The catastrophic toll this conflict has taken on children and youth is especially heartbreaking to witness. As has been highlighted so many times, there are no safe spaces in Gaza. All of Gaza's children have been subjected to the traumatic horrors of war with life-lasting consequences. All parties to the conflict need to comply with international law, including international humanitarian law, and breaches thereof must be investigated. It is likewise critical that Israel abide by the orders of the International Court of Justice. Iceland has long called for an immediate ceasefire, a surge in humanitarian aid, and the release of all hostages. We have welcomed the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2735 and urge both parties to fully implement it without delay. The fighting and suffering must end now. Mr. President, UNRWA's role responding to the current humanitarian crisis is unique. Not only are UNRWA's efforts in providing life-saving aid to the people of Gaza essential, but the agency also provides the backbone for all other humanitarian response in the area. I take this opportunity to extend our sincere thanks to UNRWA's leadership and staff for their dedicated work during these extremely difficult and life-threatening times. Iceland highly appreciated the swift actions by the agency and the Secretary General to serious allegations of UNRWA staff being involved in the heinous terrorist attack on Israel on October 7 last year. We have the fullest confidence in the ongoing OIOS process and welcome UNRWA's immediate response to the review led by Madam Colonna. Mr. President, Iceland is a long-standing supporter of UNRWA's mandate. Our core support consists of unearmarked predictable funding. Through a multi-year framework agreement at the high-level meeting in Jordan last month, the government of Iceland announced an additional 100 million Icelandic kronas contribution to UNRWA. This brings this year's overall contributions to humanitarian assistance to 290 million Icelandic kronas, which is the equivalent of $2.1 million. Reflecting our commitment to UNRWA's work, Iceland joined other states, 180 states, and signed the shared commitments on UNRWA. We have likewise joined the call to action for Palestinian children in the West Bank and Gaza. Mr. President, for 75 years, UNRWA has fulfilled its mandate that we, the General Assembly, provided it with. In the absence of a lasting political solution, UNRWA's role remains of critical importance. It must be allowed and enabled to continue to deliver on its role. It is a matter of life and death. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iceland, and I now invite the distinguished representative of Egypt, His Excellency.
خالص الشكر سيد الرئيس السيد دينيس فرانسيس السيد فيليب لازاريني المفوض العام للأونروا.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to thank Mr. Lazzarini and all of the other speakers. I would like to thank Mr. Lazzarini and all UNRWA employees for your courage and your commitment, including the ultimate sacrifice for the work that you have done. The UNRWA workers are heroes, and their sacrifice will go down in history. We are discussing means today to support UNRWA in this critical situation. UNRWA is at the moment facing a real war. Israel killed 193 UNRWA employees. These are abject, unprecedented crimes, and there need to be investigations, there needs to be accountability. More than 180 facilities have been destroyed in the West Bank and East Jerusalem belonging to UNRWA. The Israeli operations continue. There are legislative efforts underway to try to incriminate UNRWA and call it a terrorist organization. Why is UNRWA the only UN agency targeted by Israeli attacks? The response has already been provided to us by Mr. Lazzarini, namely, UNRWA is targeted because of its role in protecting the rights of the Palestinian people and the refugees, and it incarnates the international commitment to a political solution. Egypt, therefore, calls for an end to this Israeli war against UNRWA. It is an unprecedented war against UNRWA. This is the first time that UN staff have been attacked in this way. It is incumbent upon us to protect these people. Since the start of the war in Gaza, UNRWA has played a key leading role in providing assistance to Palestinian refugees and indeed to all Gazan inhabitants. UNRWA carries out the main humanitarian work in Gaza. Without these sacrifices, without this, could unarmed civilians could have been helped in Gaza at all? No. There was the advisory committee meeting in Geneva. There was a call from UNRWA to mobilize $1.2 billion to meet the urgent needs. Has only been funded at an 18%. So Egypt would call upon you and all donors to understand the extraordinary historic role that UNRWA plays and the key role it plays in this war in Gaza. It absolutely has to be financed fully and urgently. Let us not leave UNRWA alone facing the brutal Israeli aggression. Let us not leave the people in Gaza in the trap of famine. Egypt commends the efforts of the agency to address allegations against UNRWA employees regarding their participation in the October the 7th events. We also commend the fact that UNRWA has accepted the recommendations from Ms. Colonna on the objectivity of UNRWA and also investigations started elsewhere. Here we'd like to reiterate 2 points. Firstly, no UN organization, no governmental body, no NGO is safe from individual abuse being carried out by its employees. Secondly, this is a historic agency and it can not be deemed a terrorist organization. There's a need for an increase in funding based on our commitment to the Palestinian refugees. Sir, UNRWA is absolutely crucial. It helps Palestinians deal with the impact of the current crisis in Gaza. It has been criticized, but UNRWA has proven how effective it is. The UNRWA staff have made the ultimate sacrifice in helping the Palestinian people. And the roles cannot be reallocated elsewhere. Israel is doing everything it can to dismantle UNRWA without any proper reasons. Egypt would call for the protection of UNRWA and its areas of operation. The Palestinian people has never wanted to find themselves as refugees for such a long period of time. The Palestinian refugee status has meant that they've been deprived of their very basic rights, namely the end to the occupation. This needs to be brought to an end. So it is by implementing the decisions regarding the illegal situation that this will be improved, a Palestinian state that is independent, based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem at the capital needs to be set up. Mr. President, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia said, we need to invest in hope. Please, can you look at what UNRWA has done to bring hope to the Palestinian people? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
Mr. President, thank you for holding this very important conference to support the UNRWA. Allow me to commend the efforts of the concerted effort of the Secretary General to support the UNRWA, especially in these horrible circumstances facing the Palestinian people. It would be remiss not to thank the Commissioner General, Mr. Lazzarini, for his important briefing. We would like to commend his important effort to support the agency so that it can implement its UN mandate in light of these complex challenges facing the UNRWA in the occupied Palestinian territories. Mr. President, this pledging conference coincides with the continued barbaric Israeli war against Gaza. Up until this day, almost 40,000 innocent were killed, most of them women and children, with around 200 UNRWA staff and humanitarian workers. One of the most appalling crimes that Israel deliberately commits for over 9 months since the start of this war is the imposition of unilateral retaliatory measures, leading to the collapse of the humanitarian system in Gaza and the starvation of its people. The continued Israeli aggression against Gaza and putting obstacles against the entry of humanitarian assistance and its distribution, the continued attack against the UNRWA staff, the attacks against schools, hospitals, and other UN agencies is not only a grave violation of Israel's international commitments, the provisions of international law and international humanitarian law, as well as the Security Council resolutions, but is also a humanitarian massacres, and Israel must be held accountable for that. Mr. President, we hope that this conference would provide the necessary financial assistance to the agency, which is needed today more than ever, especially in light of the financial deficit of the UNRWA's budget that reached unprecedented levels. The agency needs $1.2 billion until the end of this year, according to the latest emergency appeal, to be able to cover the humanitarian needs in the occupied Palestinian territories. Only 19% of those pledges were actually met, according to the latest statistics. We would like to stress that Israel's allegations and practices against the agency is only part of a systematic approach adopted by Israel for decades to dismantle the agency and liquidate the Palestinian refugees' cause. We commend the position of the international community and its recognition of the importance of this agency's continued work through all kinds of support. We welcome the findings of the agency's independent review group, which demonstrated the false claims against the agency. It stressed that the agency is neutral and professional. It also underlined its indispensable role. The report also stressed the need to increase financial contribution to the agency. Mr. President, Jordan supports the agency with all its abilities. We will continue our effort to provide the necessary political and financial support to the agency. The last of our effort was when we co-hosted, along with Egypt and the UN, the Humanitarian Emergency Response Conference for Gaza last month. It was attended by 75 countries. It's called for long-term and sustainable funding for UNRWA so that it can undertake its duties in Gaza and all other areas of operations, including through the early recovery activities in the Gaza Strip. We work with Sweden and UNRWA and other countries to organize a ministerial meeting on the sidelines of the high-level meetings of next September for the General Assembly, and this to provide the necessary support to the agency. We also worked along with Norway on a draft resolution that would be adopted by the General Assembly to include the financing of the operational activities of the UNRWA from the regular budget of the United Nations gradually and in a sustainable manner. Jordan, along with Slovenia and Kuwait and another group of friendly countries, have launched the Common Commitment Document of the UNRWA, which included more than 118 countries. It aims at mobilizing political support to the agency and underlying its central role in the region to promote its mandate and build its capacity. To conclude, Mr. President, we reiterate that the UNRWA is an indispensable humanitarian agency. No other organization can undertake its tasks. This is not only for the provision and distribution of humanitarian assistance, but thanks to the health care, education, and basic services provided by the agency. The UNRWA, over the past decades, demonstrated its central role. Its services are indispensable as it provides its effort with efficiency and effectiveness to millions of refugees in all fields of operations. We stress that the international community's support to the agency and its budget and capacity is support to the lives, future, and fundamental rights of millions of refugees, the most important of which is the right of return and reparation for refugees. This comes along the line of a comprehensive solution to the Palestinian question on the basis of the two-state solutions in line with the resolutions of international legitimacy. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Jordan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malaysia thanks Commissioner General Lazzarini for his comprehensive update and commends his strong leadership of UNRWA. Malaysia recognizes the indispensable role of UNRWA in supporting Palestinians, more so in the current situation of humanitarian catastrophe. UNRWA is a lifeline for the Palestinians and a symbol of hope for many dependent on it. Hence, we must strive to ensure no disruptions to UNRWA's work. Malaysia welcomes the resumption of contributions by almost all donors to UNRWA. We commend those who have stepped up to sustain UNRWA's life-saving role. You have demonstrated that Palestinian lives matter. But more needs to be done to ensure that UNRWA can continue with its mandate to aid Palestinians who are suffering. To demonstrate our unwavering support to UNRWA, Malaysia is pleased to announce an additional contribution of $1 million. This will bring our total contribution to the agency to $5.2 million since November last year. We have also committed to an annual contribution to UNRWA of $200,000 from 2021 to 2025. Mr. President, in addition to contributions to UNRWA, Malaysia will continue to channel humanitarian assistance to Palestine by other means. Through the Humanitarian Trust Fund for the people of Palestine, Malaysia has contributed to various humanitarian initiatives, including medical aid, food assistance, improved sanitation and water hygiene management, clean water supply, and upgrading medical facilities for the Palestinians. Mr. President, Malaysia has been unequivocal in its support towards the establishment of a sovereign state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem at its capital. UNRWA must not be allowed to fall victim to narrow political interests, for the consequences of the agency's demise are unimaginable. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman, we are working in extraordinary circumstances, and The situation that the UNRWA is working in is coupled with a problem with funding that it is receiving. The unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe caused by the ongoing Israeli onslaught on the Gaza Strip requires a great amount of humanitarian work to respond to it. And here, the agency plays an important and irreplaceable role, and it is the backbone of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. We commend the great efforts that are exerted by the UNRWA staff, at the forefront of which is Mr. Lazzarini's work, and we salute the great sacrifices they offer, and we welcome the independent review mechanisms report that showed the falseness of the allegations against the staff. We thank the countries that resumed and increased their contributions to the agency. Mr. Chair, Qatar announces that in May of this year, it offered $25 billion, and this is an additional form of funding to support the main resources of UNRWA in 2024. And this contribution comes added to the $18 million that Qatar offered and sent to UNRWA in December 2023 to support its core finances and core resources. Qatar will continue to coordinate with the Commissioner General of UNRWA at all levels in the current stage to guarantee the continuation of efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. And this comes added to all the different forms of humanitarian, financial, and in-kind support that the State of Qatar is offering to the Palestinian people in line with our principled policy of solidarity with them. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Qatar. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
I thank you for convening this important pledging conference at such a critical period for UNRWA. I also thank the Secretary General, the PGA, and Commissioner General Lazzarini for their pertinent remarks. Presently, millions of Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan are facing unprecedented challenges. Rising regional escalations and the raging conflict in Gaza has left UNRWA facing a daily struggle to provide the services which ensure basic levels of humanity for millions of Palestinians. Malta strongly reaffirms that UNRWA is indispensable. The agency is a lifeline for Palestinians, a stabilizing force in the region, and the backbone for the humanitarian efforts in Gaza. Since 7 October, close to 200 UNRWA colleagues have been killed in Gaza, while over 180 UNRWA facilities upon which Gazan civilians depend for survival have been damaged or destroyed. This week alone, 4 schools have been struck, one of which was an UNRWA school sheltering displaced persons. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, the agency faces violence and the imposition of arbitrary measures that severely hamper its work. We underline that humanitarian personnel cannot be targeted and that full, transparent investigations into such instances is critical. Malta welcomes the UN's swift response in the wake of serious allegations that several UNRWA personnel participated in the heinous 7 October Hamas attacks against Israel. We take note that the Office of Internal Oversight Services remains engaged in investigations on the allegations. We are encouraged to note that the inquiry into the agency's neutrality, led by former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna, determined that it has in place significant mechanisms to ensure compliance and respond to neutrality breaches. We welcome the agency's commitment to implementing the recommendations put forward by the report. It is important to ensure that any gaps in compliance are bridged. This needs to be accompanied by the financial and political support necessary from influential donors and member states. For 75 years, UNRWA has spearheaded Palestinian refugees' health, education, and development needs. Malta particularly commends the agency's mission to ensure that Palestinian children have the education opportunities they deserve. We are deeply concerned that it is consistently lacking the necessary resources to deliver on this crucial mandate. Malta has been a regular contributor to UNRWA, and in keeping with this, we are pleased to announce an additional contribution during today's conference. We stress the necessity of a funding model which ensures predictable and sustained funding for the agency. The importance of political support for the agency also cannot be understated. Attacks against its mandates not only jeopardize its ability to address critical challenges, but also undermine the multilateral system. Malta has consistently called for an urgent return to a political horizon in line with the two-state solution as the main path towards peace in the Middle East. An immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all remaining hostages are paramount to this end. In the absence of a comprehensive political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, UNRWA remains a key pillar for Palestinians. It demands the international community's consistent financial and political support. Malta remains steadfastly committed to supporting UNRWA's vital role as the primary lifeline for millions of Palestinians. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Mr. President, I thank you for convening the UNRWA Pledging Conference during this critical time. I also wish to thank Secretary General Guterres and UNRWA's Commissioner General Lazzarini for the briefings and urgent call to action. UNRWA remains the only refuge for the millions of Palestinian refugees who are forced to leave their homes and their homeland. Today, in Gaza, the humanitarian situation is particularly dire, and over 1 million Palestinian refugees rely on UNRWA for food assistance. The government of Maldives is pledging to increase its annual contribution to UNRWA from $5,000 to $50,000. That is a tenfold increase. Last month, under the direction of President Dr. Moise, a telethon in solidarity with the people of Palestine was organized in the Maldives. The support and donations from the general public raised more than $1 million for UNRWA. It comprised $49,800 and more than 18.4 million Maldivian rupiah. I therefore have the honor to pledge at this conference that the Maldives' total contribution to UNRWA for the year 2024 is over $1.2 million. The Maldives recognizes the dire crisis facing UNRWA and reaffirms its commitment to help Palestine rebuild and recover from the trauma that its people are subjected to. UNRWA has been providing crucial services and emergency assistance to Palestinians for over 75 years. The past 9 months have witnessed one of the most challenging times for UNRWA. Israel has blatantly and brutally violated international humanitarian law. Since October last year, it conducted 453 attacks on UNRWA premises and killed 524 people who are sheltering in UNRWA facilities. The General Assembly mandated UNRWA in 1949 to assist and protect Palestinian refugees. The UN member states must provide financial and political support to ensure the agency's essential mandate continues. UNRWA remains more relevant today than it has ever been. The continued functioning of UNRWA will remain necessary and fundamental until all refugees are returned, resettled, reintegrated, and the original mandate of UNRWA is fulfilled. The Maldives once again reiterates its call for self-determination, justice, and a lasting peace for people of Palestine with the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Maldives. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to thank you for organizing this timely meeting. It comes at a crucial moment when the Palestinian people face the brutal onslaught of the Israeli occupying power. This meeting is a new opportunity to renew our commitment toward UNRWA and toward the Palestinian refugees. For this reason, Algeria was in the core group of the initiative launched by Jordan, Kuwait, and Slovenia on the shared commitment of UNRWA. Mr. Lazzarini, we highly appreciate your effort and dedication to help the Palestinian refugees despite the challenges you are facing every day. Please accept our sincere condolence on all your colleagues that have been killed by the Israeli occupation forces. Mr. President, in this context of humanitarian catastrophe and widespread risk of famine in Gaza, the role of humanitarian actors is crucial. As the backbone of humanitarian actions in Gaza, UNRWA is irreplaceable. Unfortunately, instead of being empowered, it is under relentless attack from the Israeli occupying power. The objective is clear: dismantling UNRWA to eliminate the refugee issue. In this regard, I would like to highlight the following 3 points. First, UNRWA's mandate is derived from General Assembly resolution and represent the will of the international community. In this context, we condemn all the attempts by the occupying authority of Israel to declare UNRWA a terrorist organization. Such a plan, if implemented, would have a devastating impact on the whole UN system. Second, no one can replace UNRWA. Neither UN agencies nor NGOs can fulfill UNRWA's role on the ground. UNRWA, I repeat, should be empowered to take care of Palestinian refugees wherever they are. Third, UNRWA's chronic financial deficit must be addressed in a sustainable manner. My country, Algeria, upon the decision of President Abdelmajid Tebboune, has very recently allocated $15 million to UNRWA in response to the SG calls to allow UNRWA to continue operating. This aim to help the agency overcome shortages following some donors' decision to freeze or to suspend their contributions. Such a situation should prompt us to think about a more stable and sustainable financial model for UNRWA. To conclude, Mr. President, we reaffirm, Algeria reaffirms its unwavering support for UNRWA and call upon all partners to continue supporting it to fulfill its mandate now and in the future. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Algeria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me extend my heartfelt appreciation to the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, the President of General Assembly, Mr. Denis Francis, and UNRWA Commissioner General Mr. Filippo Lazzarini for their powerful and moving statements. This year marks the 75th anniversary of UNRWA. The current situation is not, unfortunately, what those who established the agency envisaged 75 years ago. The plight of Palestine refugees is nowhere near its end and has only been intensifying since October last year. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed, injured, and plagued by the devastating conflict in the Gaza Strip and the heightened violence in the West Bank. At the same time, UNRWA is experiencing the most difficult moment in its history. We would like to express our sincere condolences to the loved ones and colleagues of the more than 190 brave UNRWA workers who lost their lives serving the agency. The need for an immediate, full, and complete ceasefire and the release of all remaining hostages in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 2735 cannot be more emphasized. Mr. President, today I wish to deliver 4 key messages from the government of Japan, a long-standing partner of UNRWA since 1953, even before we became a member of the UN. First, Japan strongly supports the work of UNRWA in providing critical life-saving assistance to Palestinians in Gaza who are suffering from shortages of bare minimum goods essential for human life, such as safe water, food, shelter, and medicine. UNRWA plays an indispensable role to preserve the human dignity of Palestinians. Any actions that disrupt its activities are unacceptable. UNRWA aid workers and premises should never be targeted. We are deeply disturbed by the series of attacks on UNRWA's schools over the past few days, which reportedly killed dozens of people who were taking refuge there. Second, Japan highly values the various UN-led initiatives to address the serious allegations that UNRWA staff members participated in the brutal terror attack against Israel by Hamas and other militant groups. We welcome and strongly support the commitment by Mr. Lazzarini to fully implement the recommendations contained in the report of the Independent Review Group led by Madame Colonna. For our part, we will contribute to the development and implementation of training program for area staff managers to foster accountability and compliance with the principles of integrity and neutrality. We will also contribute to the effective management practices through the lens of women, peace and security. Japan looks forward to seeing concrete outcomes in UNRWA's reforms. Third, Japan underscores the utmost importance of UNRWA in the early recovery and reconstruction of Gaza. In particular, we agree with UNRWA's focus on the education of children who are the next generation in Gaza, including treatment for the mental trauma inflicted on them by this conflict. Necessary preparations for the reconstruction should be scaled up even before a sustainable ceasefire is achieved, and the Palestinian Authority should play a critical role to this end. Fourthly, Japan is profoundly alarmed by UNRWA's severe funding shortage, which poses a great risk of the agency closing down after August. We have already contributed approximately $35 million to UNRWA this year, and we will spare no efforts to save the agency's vital operations as we have done over the past 7 decades as a major donor. We call on the international community to urgently provide further financial support to UNRWA. In conclusion, Mr. President, we need a strong UNRWA, more than ever, and we have a collective responsibility to empower the agency to navigate this time of unprecedented crisis. I thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, I would like to express France's gratitude to the UNRWA Commissioner General, Mr. Lazzarini, and all of his staff for their commitment and their exceptional work in difficult conditions. France pays tribute to all humanitarian staff of UNRWA, the UN, and NGOs that were killed in Gaza. France would reiterate its support for UNRWA in the Gaza Strip. UNRWA is essential in bringing crucial humanitarian aid to the Palestinian civilians, whose needs are huge. In 2024, France supported UNRWA's humanitarian work to the tune of 33 million euros. I'd like to announce today an additional pledge of 5 million euros to UNRWA for its emergency food assistance projects for Palestinian civilians in Lebanon and Syria, which brings the total support of France for UNRWA to 38 million euros in 2024. We would call upon all states to contribute to UNRWA's financing. France welcomes the launch by UNRWA of its high-level plan of action to implement the recommendations of the independent external audit conducted by Ms. Colonna. It's crucial to ensure, without further ado, that the agency fully respect the principles of the UN and humanitarian principles of independence, neutrality, and impartiality. Along these lines, France has joined the initiative started by Slovenia, Jordan, and Kuwait. France would reiterate its call for comprehensive, massive, unhindered access and humanitarian deliveries to meet the immense needs of the civilians in Gaza, given the absolute humanitarian emergency and the risk of famine. And in line with the rulings of the ICJ, Israel must do all it can to guarantee access for humanitarian aid and therefore guarantee free passage by land, which is the most effective means. France will continue to strive for an immediate, lasting ceasefire to bring an end to the suffering of the civilians in Gaza. It calls for the immediate release of all hostages and reiterates its condemnation of the terrorist attacks of the 7th of October. There is an urgent need for a political settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on a two-state solution and a just, fair, realistic and lasting solution for the Palestinian refugees in the context of a peace agreement. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of France. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Mr. President, Commissioner General, Excellencies, the Philippines reiterates its support to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, in providing critical services and support to the Palestinian people, even in extraordinary circumstances and during times of conflict. We also allowed UNRWA for accepting the Colonna report and its plan to establish an action plan to implement the recommendations contained in the final report. We note the complexity of UNRWA's work, and we are confident that implementing the recommended measures of the Colonna report would enhance its effectiveness and efficiency. We are confident that this pledging conference will serve as a bridge to UNRWA's long-term recovery, stabilization planning and programming activities. In this regard, and in firm solidarity with the Palestinian people in its support to the work of UNRWA, I am pleased to inform that the Philippines has already remitted our voluntary financial contribution for the 2024 program budget of UNRWA, amounting to US $100,000. This doubles our previous Philippine commitment to UNRWA's budget. Thank you, Excellencies.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Commissioner General Lazzarini, colleagues, this meeting is a much-needed opportunity for the international community to renew its support for UNRWA. For the past 9 months, we have been witnessing an ever-growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Civilians in critical infrastructure, as well as UN facilities and humanitarian workers, have become a recurrent target of the occupying power. We said in the past, we repeat it today, this is unacceptable and constitutes serious violations of international humanitarian law. In this scenario, UNRWA's work has been gravely impaired, as extensively informed by the Commissioner General Lazzarini. The agency's dire budgetary situation is of particular concern. Funding interruptions jeopardize not only the fulfillment of its mandate, but also the implementation of the recently adopted ICJ provisional measures, which established the need to ensure humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Today, Brazil recommits to UNRWA's valuable humanitarian action. Since 2008, we have contributed more than $20 million to its budget through cooperation projects as well as donations of food and medicine. This year, besides our usual annual financial support, we will provide approximately $400,000 for the 2024 budget, totaling around $500,000. Brazil is also providing critically important political support for UNRWA. We joined the shared commitments presented this morning by 118 member states and counting, and we kindly call all member states to also join. Moreover, Brazil took on the role of second vice president of the Advisory Commission, which we will preside for the one-year term starting in July 2025. Brazil reiterates its call for an urgent, immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, the immediate release of all hostages and the safe, unimpeded and sustainable delivery of humanitarian aid at scale into and within Gaza. We also reiterate our full support for an independent and viable state of Palestine, whose sovereignty is recognized by Brazil since 2010, living side by side with Israel in peace and security within the 1967 borders, which includes the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner General Lazzarini, Excellencies, colleagues. Let me thank you for convening today's pledging conference for UNRWA and express our condolences to the organization and all the families of the over 190 staff members that have lost their lives in Gaza since last October. Over the last year, UNRWA has continued to play an essential role for stability in the Middle East. We acknowledge the crucial role of UNRWA in providing life-saving assistance to the civilian population in Gaza. Today, we meet at a moment of great challenge and uncertainty, coupled with ever-increasing needs and vulnerabilities worldwide, but especially in the Middle East. Austrian development cooperation continues to strive within the framework of bilateral cooperation and multilateral cooperation with partners such as UNRWA to improve the situation of Palestinians. Over the years, Austria has been a reliable partner for UNRWA. Following allegations that staff members were involved in Hamas' terrorist attack on Israel on October 7, Austria, like other international partners, suspended its payments to UNRWA. For the sake of its own credibility, the UN must be above reproach. We therefore called on UNRWA and the UN to conduct comprehensive, swift and thorough investigations and are looking forward to hearing more about their outcome once the OIOS investigations are concluded. We welcome that in addition to these investigations, the UN also swiftly set up an independent review group chaired by former Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna. After studying the recommendations contained in her report, the action plan presented by UNRWA on how to implement the recommendations, and taking into account the clear and public commitment of UNRWA and the UN leadership to implement these recommendations, we resumed our funding to UNRWA. In particular, we welcome the plan that these measures will include ensuring UNRWA's impartiality, strengthening internal review mechanisms, and rigorous vetting of staff members. We expect swift implementation of this plan and call for rapid clarification of the most recent allegations. A total of €3.4 million is budgeted for 2024. Part of the Austrian funds will be used for the improvement of UNRWA's internal audit mechanism. Another significant component forms our multi-annual agreement for UNRWA's health program in Gaza in order to enhance predictability and long-term financial programming. Much work lies ahead for UNRWA to effectively implement the many measures. A great deal of trust has been lost. In the medium and long-term, cooperation with UNRWA can only continue if the reforms produced results. Together with our international partners, we will closely monitor the implementation of the action plan. Our aim is to ensure that UNRWA is able to continue to fulfill its important role. As reiterated in the past, Austria reconfirms its commitment to the two-state solution and to a viable Palestinian state living peacefully side by side with Israel. The horrific developments since the last donor conference are a stark reminder of the necessity of a durable, negotiated Israeli-Palestinian solution. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Austria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Monsieur le Commissaire Général Lazzarini, Belgium thanks you for organizing the yearly UNRWA Pledging Conference. For more than 9 months, we have been witnessing the blatant, unacceptable, and inhumane disregard of international humanitarian law. In unspeakable conditions, the United Nations staff has managed to perform its duties, has managed to do a tremendous job. We present our sincere condolences, Mr. Commissioner General, for the heroes of UNRWA and of other organizations that were killed, fulfilling their mission to protect and save lives. Humanity has failed them. Months later, we say it louder and louder to the parties: silence the guns, rockets and bombs, and ensure safe and unhindered humanitarian access. Not coming to an immediate and durable ceasefire undermines the core of humanity and the fundamentals of peace and prosperity for the peoples of Israel and of Palestine. I repeat the call to action for children in Gaza and the West Bank as an initiative from Jordan, Belgium, and the European Union. Belgium, Mr. President, has been and remains a strong supporter of UNRWA since its inception. Our support is both political and financial. As long as there is no global, just and sustainable solution for the conflict, the mandate of UNRWA will remain vital. UNRWA has to assist, as we all know, and protect more than 5 million Palestinian refugees. UNRWA is an essential factor for regional stability. The education, health, relief and social services offered by UNRWA are and remain more than ever a beacon of hope for Palestinian refugees. In short, UNRWA is indispensable. And yet, almost 200 UNRWA staff members have been killed. UNRWA staff faces severe restrictions of movement and operate with unfair and unacceptable administrative, legal and operational barriers in the West Bank and Jerusalem. They are denied their visas. They are labeled as members of a terrorist organization. Their headquarters is targeted by violent demonstrations and arson. This must stop. The report issued by the Independent Review Group led by Catherine Colonna confirmed that the UN agency is a trustworthy institution. We strongly welcome this report, its action points and the action plan UNRWA has made, and we encourage the implementation of the recommendations with the support from us donors. We ask countries that have not done so yet to support UNRWA's shared commitments and thank all those, nearly 120 this morning, who have done so already. In order to support, Mr. President, the mandate of the organization, my country, Belgium, renewed its 3-year financial agreement in 2024. In 2024, we increased our core contribution to UNRWA to the total amount of 16.5 million euros. For 2025 and 2026, 14 million euros have already been committed. And once again, these are core funding, so there is full flexibility for UNRWA to do what they deem necessary to do with it. Belgium remains a strong, reliable and predictable supporter of UNRWA, and we will continue to do so until a just and lasting solution to the final status issue of Palestine refugees is reached. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, PGA, Denis Francis, and UNRWA Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, for their valuable remarks. As the chair of the working group on the financing of UNRWA, we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to all delegations taking the floor today for their contributions to the organization in these trying times. At the outset, I also wish to pay tribute to the memory of those brave UNRWA staff who lost their lives in Gaza, making the ultimate sacrifice in their honorable mission. Attacks on UNRWA employees and premises are inexcusable. We condemn these attacks in the strongest terms. Mr. President, for 75 years, UNRWA has played a crucial role in delivering essential services and emergency aid to approximately 6 million Palestinian refugees in Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Amidst unprecedented humanitarian crisis and widespread death and destruction in Gaza, this assistance has become even more indispensable. In the 10th month of the conflict, over 39,000 Palestinians have lost their lives, with more than 85,000 injured. Almost 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are displaced. Hunger and disease loom large. UNRWA remains the lifeline for Palestinian refugees, saving lives and safeguarding their rights, dignity, and identity. It serves as a crucial stabilizing force in the region. Therefore, sufficient, sustained, and predictable funding for UNRWA is imperative. On our side, I am pleased to announce that last May, Turkey transferred its annual contribution of $10 million in cash donation to UNRWA for the year 2024. In light of recent physical and political attacks, increasing the agency's financial strain, we have decided to increase our contribution. Last year, we allocated an additional $1 million, and this year, we are in the process of providing an additional $2 million to UNRWA, $2 million. In addition to our regular contribution to the general budget, we are also dispatching in-kind assistance to the Palestinian refugees through the agency. We have been donating 26,000 tons of flour to UNRWA every year. We will increase these to 30,000 tons this year. Turkey's contributions constitute 1/3 of the total aid provided by all countries to Gaza, underscoring our steadfast commitment. Mr. President, UNRWA is a political, legal, and humanitarian and moral responsibility of the international community, especially those who support Israel in continuing their invasion until a just solution based on the two-state vision is realized. We call on all member states to work together in ensuring that UNRWA continues its critical work. Turkey will continue to support UNRWA's vital work, both politically and financially. I thank you again.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Kenya's delegation thanks the President of the General Assembly for convening this crucial pledging conference. We also thank the Secretary General for his opening remarks and the UNRWA Commissioner General for his insightful but sobering briefing. Kenya remains gravely concerned by the unabated destruction that has resulted in an unbearable humanitarian situation in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories. The sheer number of civilian casualties, the agony and suffering inflicted, not sparing the vulnerable populations, including women, children, the elderly, and the sick, and the relentless wanton destruction of civilian infrastructure in Gaza are unacceptable. This deplorable situation demands immediate and concerted international action to alleviate further suffering and protect the rights and dignity of the Palestinian people. We express our deepest condolences to UNRWA, the UN, and other humanitarian organizations for the loss of their dedicated staff members who have tragically paid the ultimate price in the line of duty. Their sacrifice must not be in vain. It should motivate all the humanitarian workers and the international community to be more resolute in providing vital assistance to Palestinians in need, notwithstanding the extremely challenging conditions. The critical humanitarian role of UNRWA in providing life-saving assistance to Palestinian refugees cannot be overstated. Its efforts in providing education, health care, and emergency relief are indispensable for ensuring the basic dignity and welfare of millions of Palestinians. It is therefore imperative that UNRWA is adequately and predictably resourced to continue its essential work. Indeed, the international community must more than ever before stand up to be counted and reinforce its support for UNRWA, especially given the extraordinary and ever-escalating needs and the resultant budget deficits. Kenya is happy to play its part in this cause within our means. In this regard, the government of Kenya has recently made a donation of $1 million in response to the Secretary General's call for humanitarian support to the people of Palestine. We echo the calls that have been made to all member states and international partners to tangibly support the work of UNRWA and other humanitarian agencies working in Palestine. Together, we can alleviate and mitigate the suffering, restore hope, and work towards a just and lasting peace in the region. In conclusion, I reaffirm Kenya's solidarity with the Palestinian people, not only in addressing their humanitarian plight, but also their unflinching quest for self-determination. We remain fully committed to the two-state solution, where a viable sovereign state of Palestine lives side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security and in line with the relevant resolutions of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra.
Monsieur le Président. President, Commissioner General, Your Excellencies, thank you for organizing this meeting. First of all, I would like to express our sincere recognition to UNRWA and to you, Commissioner General, for the tireless work that you all do every day to allow Palestine refugees to have access to essential services in the region, and more specifically, in particular, for the efforts being made to provide humanitarian aid and assistance to Gaza. As we approach the 75th anniversary of the organization's establishment in 1949, Andorra reaffirms its support to the irreplaceable role of the agency, which provides assistance to civilians in distress by providing them access to food, healthcare, and water, but also a glimmer of hope by providing education to children and young people who are the future of the region. Since October 2023, 197 members of UNRWA's staff have been killed, and 453 attacks against establishments, buildings have been registered. In addition, 2/3 of the agency's schools in Gaza have been affected, the latest only 3 days ago. Humanitarian personnel, shelters, hospitals and schools should never be targeted. Ending these attacks is an obligation under international humanitarian law, and it is also a moral imperative. We'd like to express our solidarity with the victims and their families. Andorra calls on the international community and all parties involved in the conflict to put an end to the suffering of the civilian population, in particular the most vulnerable. We call for a ceasefire and for the liberation of hostages, and once again for respect for human rights. Mr. President.
The urgent need to continue its financial support to UNRWA and has contributed in 2023 and 2024 until now to the agency 60,000 euros. This is a modest amount but very sincere. We join also the declaration initiated by Jordan, Kuwait and Slovenia that was launched today. We also praise the report of the independent review group led by the former French Foreign Minister, Catherine Colonna, and welcome UNRWA's implementation of its recommendations. Indeed, in times of conflict, information becomes an easy target too, and we advocate in favor of UNRWA's neutrality principle. To conclude, Andorra reaffirms its unwavering support to UNRWA and its personnel and the crucial work to mitigate the suffering of people in need in Palestine and elsewhere in the region. Thank you very much.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Andorra. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by expressing our deep condolences to the families of over 190 UNRWA staff killed in Gaza. I thank the Commissioner General for his briefing today. As a lifeline for millions of Palestinian refugees, we must protect and reinforce UNRWA. But today, UNRWA is on life support. UNRWA is also fighting attempts to decapitate its role, making it helpless to effectively help the Palestinian refugees. In this regard, I wish to convey two messages. First, Indonesia, if we truly stand for humanity, we must stand with UNRWA. For the Indonesian people, the wounds of the Palestinian people are our wounds. For this reason, in 2023, Indonesia has tripled our annual voluntary contribution. We have also front-loaded our 2024 contribution while others suspended theirs. Today, I am announcing a doubling of our annual voluntary contribution beginning 2024. This will make our annual contribution to 1.2 million, a 600% increase from January 2023. In addition, Indonesia will also provide a grant of $2 million to the UNRWA Flash Appeal. Mr. President, Indonesia's support to Palestine is a collective solidarity. From November 2023 to April 2024, the government and the people of Indonesia have sent 3,594 tons of assistance worth over $11 million. Since November 2023, the Indonesian Zakat Fund, Basnas, has distributed around $3.3 million to Palestine. Going forward, we will continue to develop innovative sources and diversify funding stream to help UNRWA, including through partnership with the Indonesian Zakat Fund. Second, supporting UNRWA is not an act of solidarity. It is a fundamental investment to humanity and in regional peace and stability. Therefore, we must advocate for UNRWA's mandate, reinforce its role, and reject any efforts to delegitimize the agency. Last month, I painfully remarked it at the Council that the children who died in Gaza may be the fortunate ones, and those who survive are surviving in a hellish condition. Given the Security Council's inability to stop wars, the least we must do is to support UNRWA, ensuring it's adequately funded and empowered. To conclude, let me reiterate that UNRWA is an integral part of a just and lasting solution in Palestine. Until there is a solution for the Palestinian refugees, UNRWA must have our unwavering support. Thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
I thank the Secretary General, the President of the General Assembly, and the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Lazzarini, for their remarks. The significance of this meeting today cannot be stressed enough. It is of vital importance that assistance and relief are immediately delivered and made available without any impediment to civilians that are bearing the brunt of a conflict in which they have no part. There is not a single person in Gaza that has not been impacted by the destructive violence that ensued the terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas on October the 7th, causing immense suffering and civilian victims, particularly among innocent Palestinian women and children. At the same time, we have all along categorically condemned Hamas attacks and hostage-taking. We call for the immediate release of all hostages, for the respect of international humanitarian law by all parties, and for unimpeded and continuous access to aid delivery throughout the Gaza Strip, in line with the Security Council Resolution 2735. Mr. President, impeding and delaying aid will only lead to more suffering, and as we have seen countless times before, suffering leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to further extremism. We need to prevent this cycle of violence, as it would further hamper the prospect of a durable peace that can only be achieved through a political agreement based on a two-state solution. UNRWA and other UN agencies need to be allowed to deliver on their mandate in total safety for their staff. Their role is crucial, their work is essential. For this reason, Italy will support UNRWA with 5 million euros, of which 2 million will be allocated to the flash appeal for projects in the West Bank. Italy strongly reaffirms neutrality as the overriding principle of humanitarian aid. In this vein, we believe it is of utmost importance that the recommendations in the Colonna report will be fully implemented. Italy's commitment to bringing humanitarian relief to Gaza remains steadfast, as evidenced by our total contribution of 55 million euros, mainly devoted to health and food security sectors. In this spirit, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched the Food for Gaza initiative last March. These are concrete signs of the Italian government's strong commitment to alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian population. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Italy. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Commissioner General, this conference is taking place at a time when there are no words anymore to describe the gravity of the situation in the Gaza Strip. Luxembourg deplores the massive loss of human life and condemns all violations of international humanitarian law, depriving civilians and humanitarian workers of the protection which is their right. We commend the courage and extraordinary commitment of the UNRWA staff under the leadership of Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini to provide essential services and protection to Palestinian refugees in the region and in particular in the Gaza Strip. We would like to present our most sincere condolences to the families and colleagues of those who died since the 7th of October. We would reiterate here our call for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages and the full implementation of all GA and Security Council resolutions, as well as the interim measures on Israel from the ICJ. UNRWA is the very backbone of humanitarian aid in Gaza. Its work with the Palestinian people for 75 years now makes it crucial and irreplaceable. The role of the agency in all countries in the region who host Palestinian refugees and its role in maintaining the stability there is undoubted. We would urge all member states to preserve the vital work of UNRWA. We are very concerned by the numerous number of legal and logistical obstacles that UNRWA is confronted with in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, we would reaffirm our commitment to UNRWA in terms of the Madam Coroner report. There needs to be impartiality, given the increasing needs of the Palestinian refugees, particularly in the area of education and basic needs of their UNRWA needs predictable financing. I am delighted to say that Luxembourg has decided to provide €1 million extra, and that is flexible financing for UNRWA, and that is in addition to the €2.1 million. So soon, our support will be €5.2 million for 2024 by the end of the year. Luxembourg intends to renew its strategic partnership with UNRWA for the next 3 years. We also support the digitalization project of the archives that will help to preserve the identity and background of Palestinian refugees. Luxembourg is committed to remaining a reliable partner for UNRWA financially and also politically speaking. Along with more than 100 countries, we joined with the Declaration of Commitment initiated by Kuwait, Jordan, and Slovenia. We will continue to support UNRWA and Palestinian refugees until a just political solution be found to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as part of a two-state solution. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Luxembourg, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Mr. President, UNRWA does life-saving work. This is why successive Australian governments have funded it since 1951. UNRWA is the only organisation with the capacity to deliver aid on the scale needed to address the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. Around 90% of Gazans are displaced. Almost the entire population of 2.3 million is facing acute food insecurity. UNRWA's ability to operate is crucial in the current crisis. In delivering on its mandate, UNRWA must ensure its integrity and neutrality are beyond reproach. Australia welcomed the decisive actions by UNRWA and UN Secretary-General Guterres earlier this year to put in place additional safeguards, strengthen the integrity of operations and develop an action plan. That is why Australia resumed funding to UNRWA in March, and it is why we will continue our funding of $20 million this year. Australia welcomed the findings of the Colonna review into UNRWA and was pleased the UN Secretary-General accepted the recommendations and that UNRWA has committed to implement them all. Going forward, UNRWA must continue to ensure the highest standards of governance and accountability are met. It must conduct a prompt and thorough investigation when any credible allegation is raised and ensure anyone responsible is held to account. Australia will work with UNRWA to maintain an ongoing focus on diligence and vigilance in its operations. We have expressed this shared commitment along with over 80 other donors earlier today. We urge Israel to recognise UNRWA's mandate, work constructively to ensure its integrity and facilitate its life-saving work. We express our sincerest condolences for the 193 UNRWA staff and more than 80 other aid workers killed in this conflict. The death of any aid worker is unacceptable. Australia has continually advocated for adherence to international humanitarian law and the protection of aid workers. Civilians must be protected, aid must flow at scale, and hostages must be released. The humanitarian catastrophe we are witnessing in Gaza cannot continue. Australia's guiding principle has always been the pursuit of a just and enduring peace in the form of a two-state solution. UNRWA's work remains vital as the international community strives for a just and enduring peace in the region. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Chair. We join many friends and partners today in acknowledging UNRWA's indispensable assistance to Palestinian refugees across the Middle East region, and especially the lifeline it provides to civilians in Gaza today. UNRWA's delivery of essential humanitarian goods and services, as well as its operations in areas such as healthcare and education, make a significant contribution to the stability of the region at all times. At times like this, its work is and will continue to be more necessary than ever. We pay tribute to the 197 UNRWA employees who have lost their lives while trying to save the lives of others and alleviate their suffering in the most extreme of circumstances. We reiterate our full condemnation of any attacks on humanitarian personnel. Our support for UNRWA services in the occupied Palestinian territories and neighbouring countries is an important element of Liechtenstein's humanitarian and development assistance to the Middle East region. I'm therefore pleased to announce that Liechtenstein will maintain its support for UNRWA in 2024 in the amount of 100,000 Swiss francs to support its work in the Gaza Strip and West Bank. We hope that this financial contribution will assist UNRWA in carrying out its work to full capacity. UNRWA's efforts must live up to the highest standards of transparency and accountability, should not be politicized, and should receive the full support of the international community. In light of these responsibilities, Liechtenstein is deeply concerned by the allegations of the involvement of 12 UNRWA employees in the 7 October terrorist attacks by Hamas. We welcome the Colonna report, which has provided a thorough and comprehensive analysis of UNRWA's mechanisms and procedures, as well as a clear basis on which UNRWA can take steps necessary to address governance issues. We have been encouraged by UNRWA's quick and positive response and look forward to being part of the conversation on implementation. We will also closely follow the ongoing investigation by the UN Office of Internal Oversight Services and look forward to their findings. In respect of the above, we have joined 117 other states today in endorsing the statement of shared commitments on UNRWA, which we believe sets out a clear basis for an enhanced relationship between the agency and member states. On a personal note, Mr. Chair, I wish to express my pleasure to see you chairing this meeting and to thank you for your personal and professional friendship and wish you all the best for your future.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein also for his comments directed to myself. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Chair, and also Excellencies, colleagues, Commissioner General. Let me first start by expressing Germany's appreciations for the work carried out by UNRWA and its staff, and express, like other speakers before me, my deepest condolences and respect and appreciation for those and their families who lost their lives in this service. Germany has been a steadfast supporter of UNRWA's important work for Palestinian refugees in all country contexts: Lebanon, Syria, the occupied Palestinian territories, Jordan. Underlining our support, in March, the German Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation and the German Federal Foreign Office announced new funding of 45 million euros for UNRWA in Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and the West Bank. Additionally, that is 2 weeks ago, Foreign Minister Baerbock announced 10 million euros in new funding for UNRWA during her recent visit to the occupied Palestinian territories. In addition, she announced 14 million euros for WFP and NGOs for their life-saving work in Gaza. In Beirut, Foreign Minister Baerbock announced 18 million euros in humanitarian assistance for IDPs, Syrian refugees, and their Lebanese host communities. This adds to Germany's significant humanitarian diplomatic efforts and humanitarian assistance to help alleviate the tremendous suffering in Gaza. Our humanitarian aid now stands at 313 million euros since 2023, and we are committed to continue our efforts. During Foreign Minister Baerbock's 10 visits to the region since 7th of October 2023, she repeatedly called for humanitarian assistance to be scaled up and distributed to the civilian population in Gaza immediately and without any obstructions. We reiterate the urgency of full, rapid, safe, and unhindered access to humanitarian assistance at scale for Palestinians in need, and of allowing and facilitating humanitarian workers and international organizations to operate effectively inside Gaza. A sustainable deconfliction system is of crucial importance. UNRWA and other UN organizations must be enabled to completely fulfill their mandates. UNRWA plays a vital role in meeting the basic needs of the people in Gaza. UNRWA remains an important partner for other international organizations that rely on UNRWA's operative structures. In the context of enormous challenges, Germany remains supportive of UNRWA's work, and we very much welcome that UNRWA is fully committed to implementing the recommendations of the Colonel Report and urge UNRWA to continue its efforts in this regard. These reforms and their thorough implementation at all ranks and in all fields of operation are necessary to provide a stable, sustainable basis for UNRWA's role and execution of the mandate and the future. Neutrality is key in all fields of operations, and we expect further improvements. This is why we take also the new allegations concerning the neutrality of UNRWA staff brought forward by Israel this week very seriously, and we trust and we expect, of course, that UNRWA takes all necessary measures for a thorough investigation to make sure that there is no place for extremism, hatred, terrorism in the organization. We are looking forward to seeing continued progress in the implementation of the high-level action plan and to continuing the constructive dialogue we are having with UNRWA's leadership. Continued dialogue will be very important, as there are many challenges ahead. We especially call on non-traditional donors to provide financial support. We also welcome that UNRWA announced to build on and extend partnerships with other UN agencies and partners in the region in order to keep delivering on its mandate. We encourage UNRWA to intensify those efforts. UNRWA's mandate is closely linked to the prospect of a true political perspective. Germany firmly believes in two states, Israel and Palestine, for two peoples in the Middle East, and we fully support Palestinians' right to self-determination. Every child, every family deserves to live in peace, prosperity, and in dignity. That is why Germany has been working towards a two-state solution for years, and we will relentlessly continue to do so. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Germany, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Denmark.
Commissioner General, colleagues, at a time of immense civilian suffering, enormous loss of life, and a majority of Gaza's population facing high levels of acute food insecurity, UNRWA has continued to play an indispensable role since Hamas' deplorable terrorist attack on 7 October. Denmark deplores the high number of humanitarian workers who have been killed during this crisis. We convey our deepest condolences to the UNRWA staff who have been killed while saving the life of others. Their memory and invaluable work must not be forgotten and should be restated here today, where we renew our commitment to UNRWA. And once again, we call on all parties to protect humanitarian workers, civilians, as well as civilian infrastructure, in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law. Recognizing that UNRWA remains the main lifeline for almost 2 million civilians in Gaza, Denmark has continued its annual core funding of $15 million and made additional contributions in 2023 of approximately $10 million to UNRWA. 2 weeks ago, Denmark again announced an additional humanitarian package to Gaza, including a contribution of around $4.3 million to UNRWA. In addition to being the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, UNRWA plays a crucial and stabilizing role in the West Bank and the wider region. The current financial situation of UNRWA is critical and unsustainable. There is a need for more predictable and flexible funding to ensure a robust and efficient UNRWA. We hope this pledging conference today will be a step towards that aim. It is equally important that all restrictions on UNRWA's ability to perform its critical functions in line with its mandate are lifted. Denmark, along the lines with the EU, reiterates the urgent call for an immediate ceasefire, release of all hostages, and the full, safe and unhindered provision of aid into Gaza. At the same time, Denmark continues its unwavering commitment to a lasting peace on the basis of a two-state solution. On a final note, and following the allegations directed towards UNRWA earlier this year, Denmark welcomed the prompt response by the Secretary-General, as well as the Commissioner-General of UNRWA. We have also expressed our support for the Commissioner-General's commitment to implement the recommendations by the Independent Review Group, and we have extended our support to the implementation process. It is critically important that UNRWA comes out of the past months as a strengthened and modernized agency and is able to restore trust in the organization. Denmark would do whatever is within our abilities to assist this transformation. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Denmark. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Gracias. Thank you, distinguished colleagues. This conference is being held in exceptional circumstances which were impossible to predict at the beginning of June last year. Since the beginning of this crisis, Spain has insisted that only an immediate and permanent ceasefire can alleviate the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza and meet their humanitarian needs to allow for wide-scale, swift, unhindered access for humanitarian aid and the safe liberation of all those hostages who are still captive in the hands of Hamas. The Commissioner-General, Philippe Lazzarini, has been crystal clear about the seriousness of the financial situation of the agency and the scope of the challenges that it is facing. Against the current backdrop of a humanitarian disaster, UNRWA has repeatedly demonstrated that it is the backbone of the multilateral humanitarian assistance in Gaza. More than ever, UNRWA is irreplaceable now. However, it is paying a terrible price, with almost 200 members of its staff who have been killed since the 7th of October. Last weekend, the attack on a UNRWA school in Nusairat caused more than a dozen victims and many more people were injured. International humanitarian law is not being respected. We once again call for the duty to respect international humanitarian law by all parties. We also recall that complying with the provisional measures of the ICJ is not an option, and we once again demand that they be complied with immediately. The civilian population in Gaza is unfairly paying a price for the crimes of Hamas. This is not acceptable. That is why Spain is in favor of a swift conclusion to the review of all the process to allocate humanitarian aid of the EU, and we have also increased our financial support to UNRWA after the allegations of working with Hamas, but the investigations have not backed up these allegations, and we therefore welcome the efforts of the agency to implement the recommendations of the independent review. Since the 7th of October, Spain has disbursed 43 million euros to UNRWA, 23.5 million only this year. We encourage other donors and partners to increase their contributions. I would also like to underscore the support to UNRWA from Spanish civil society and the various autonomous communities and municipalities. Our commitment goes beyond the figures. Spain will chair the advisory committee until June of next year. We hope that the United Nations will also formally support the idea to have a summit that can lead to an in-depth discussion about addressing this terrible situation that is going on in Gaza. We also hope that in the next ministerial meeting of the UN that will lead to momentum towards a two-state solution. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Spain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
Thank you, President, and thank you for convening us. Over the last year, UNRWA personnel and facilities have been under constant attack. The repeated violations of international law are unacceptable. Almost 200 UNRWA staff have been killed in Gaza since October last year. Our thoughts are with their colleagues and their affected families. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire, and we reiterate other core messages. The hostages must be released. The parties to the conflict have an obligation to ensure safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access. Civilians must be protected. The fighting must end now. We strongly reject unilateral actions by any party, including Israel, aimed at undermining the work of the United Nations. If UNRWA is prevented from implementing its mandate, it will have ramifications way beyond the Middle East and could potentially threaten the UN's work wherever it operates. We commend UNRWA's ability to provide basic services and humanitarian assistance under extreme circumstances. Ensuring that UNRWA can continue to deliver on its mandate is our shared responsibility. We must prioritize predictable and sufficient financial support to UNRWA, thus enabling the agency to focus on its critical work. That is why we today are pleased to announce an additional contribution. We will increase our contribution to UNRWA by 100 million Norwegian kroner, which is approximately $10 million, raising our total contribution to UNRWA for this year to 475 million Norwegian kroner, approximately $47 million. We strongly encourage other donors and potential donors to come forward with contributions. We welcome that most countries that suspended their funding earlier this year have resumed their contributions and hope the rest will follow. Norway has maintained our support throughout this period, firmly believing that we cannot collectively punish millions of refugees and an entire organization for the alleged conduct of a few. We also welcome the agency's action plan for implementing the Kelowna report's recommendations and stress the need to strike the right balance between implementation of the action plan and UNRWA's core mandated tasks in all its fields of operation. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza. But UNRWA is so much more than a humanitarian agency. UNRWA is our joint commitment to securing the rights of Palestine refugees until a political solution can be found. And I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا جزيلا السيد الرئيس. في البداية أود أن أعرب عن بالغ
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly, who continues to follow the situation closely and holds these meetings while the Palestinian people are living in a desperate situation because of the ongoing genocidal war started by the occupying Israeli forces, inhuman against the Palestinian people. This is astonishing disdain by Israel of all international humanitarian rules and all of the relevant resolutions, 2735 being the most recent. These reflect the desire of the international community to bring an end to the occupation. I would like to thank Philippe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, for being here and for his comprehensive briefing. This reflected the devastating situation and the scale of the suffering and the inhuman suffering that the Palestinian people are experiencing because of the crimes and carnage carried out by the Israeli occupying forces. They've used all types of weapons against the Palestinian people. Mr. Lazzarini clarified the funding crisis that UNRWA is experiencing. This prevents it from implementing its mandate. Sir, Iraq would like to reiterate its support for UNRWA. UNRWA is continuing to uphold its mandate and its operational work. The importance of UNRWA's work is crucial. It must be able to be continued. Because of Israeli attacks, there have been many sacrifices within UNRWA, and the Iraqi government would like to express its sincere condolences to families of UNRWA victims, those people who were killed when they were carrying out their duty. By the same token, we commend the efforts made by UNRWA and its vital role in assisting millions of Palestinian people over the past 75 years. The scale of the task facing UNRWA is huge. UNRWA, nonetheless, is the largest UN program, and its efforts are very specific. They have a direct impact. They pursue various different aims, including the SDGs. UNRWA is not just a humanitarian agency. Rather, it is a form of salvation, so to speak, for the Palestinian people. It is the only organization, we believe, that has the ability and experience for many years now to shoulder humanitarian tasks and also development tasks on a large scale. So we are concerned by the unjust allegations in the media that wish to tarnish UNRWA's reputation. These allegations, which have not been backed up by evidence, are talking about just a few UNRWA staff members, and UNRWA has thousands of staff. This cannot justify a stoppage of funding, especially given the enormous suffering of the Palestinian people and the huge needs that they have. Iraq, in particular in Gaza, Iraq welcomes the fact that donor countries have continued to provide support to UNRWA, and we would urge those countries that have ceased funding to continue and to resume it. UNRWA has not fully been able to help the people it needs to, so we reject this tactic of trying to restrict UNRWA's work. We are going to make a contribution of $25 million to UNRWA to help it fund its work. The Iraqi Association of the Red Crescent is seeking to support UNRWA as well. We are also providing direct aid through the Iraqi Red Crescent. In conclusion, sir, we would reiterate Iraq's support for UNRWA, its efforts and its unfailing committed work. We commend the most recent visit of the Commissioner General, Mr. Lazzarini, to Iraq. We believe that UNRWA will remain the backbone of aid provided to Palestinian people and to supplying assistance to them. We reiterate our unchanged position as regards the rights of the Palestinian people and their legitimate aspirations to have an independent state with East Jerusalem as capital. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
I'm going to deliver this statement in English, unfortunately. Vice President, it's good to see you presiding over this important meeting. Commissioner General Lazzarini, ladies and gentlemen. We are here because of a default in the international system, which have promised in 1945 to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Let's not forget the fact that we're here today after 75 years because of the repeated and systematic violations of international law. It is as simple as this. My country, Oman, is a strong supporter of UNRWA, and I would like to reiterate Oman's commitment to continue supporting UNRWA and its noble mission. We agree with the Secretary General of the United Nations this morning when saying that we're here to protect UNRWA and UNRWA staff. We also share the view of the President of the General Assembly that not only UNRWA existence is at stake, but the sanctity of human life. It is not only about funding, it is about saving lives, precious lives. We call on member states to continue believing and supporting UNRWA. It is much needed now, more than ever, and it is very much indispensable. We categorically condemn, in the strongest terms, the attack and the killing of UNRWA staff. Our condolences, Mr. Lazzarini, for the 197 UNRWA staff who have been killed in the service of humanity, unreplaceable lives. And we call for the full and dignified recognition of those. It is a huge sacrifice that not only deserve the recognition of the international community, but holding those responsible accountable for their actions. It is time to end the 75 years of tragedy of the Palestinians. It is too much for the Palestinians to bear. UNRWA, supposedly a temporary mandate, remains pertinent and necessary until we see an end to the occupation. Through the realization of the two-state solution, Commissioner General, allow me to conclude by stating once again, my country is totally dedicated for the support of UNRWA, financially, politically, and logistically. Thank you very much.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Oman. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and laissez-moi d'abord remercier.
I would like first of all to thank the Commissioner General for being here and for the report that he has presented. And I would like to begin by stating Canada's fundamental stance on the situation in the Middle East and on our support to UNRWA. We unequivocally condemn Hamas, a terrorist organization, for its attacks against Israel on the 7th of October 2023. We support the overall agreement presented by President Biden, which would lead to a ceasefire in Gaza, to all hostages being freed, we shouldn't forget about them, and to a significant lasting increase in humanitarian assistance. But even in the absence of a ceasefire, international humanitarian law must be upheld at all times. This is critical so that the vital aid can get to people as quickly as possible in full security and that it be unhindered.
Mr. Chairman, UNRWA and Palestinian refugees are facing challenges on a scale we have not seen before in the region. Nothing in this conflict dating back to the mid-1940s and even before then, nothing in this conflict compares with the humanitarian and overall dire situation which so many people are facing, as well as the loss of life and the dramatic injuries that have taken place to tens of thousands of Palestinians. We are also increasingly concerned about the escalating tension along the border with Lebanon and the risk of regional expansion of the conflict. We would like to take this opportunity to offer our sincerest condolences to the families of the 197 UNRWA staff who've been killed in this conflict. We recognize the extraordinary commitment of UNRWA staff who have continued to heroically deliver assistance to those who need it most. We continue to be gravely concerned about all the reports of the deteriorating access for humanitarian aid into Gaza and within Gaza, at a time when Gazans need to see more aid, not less aid. Civilians, aid workers, and facilities must be protected. Beyond Gaza, we condemn the violent attacks by extremist settlers in the West Bank, as well as attacks on UNRWA premises and the threats to their operating environment, most recently in East Jerusalem. In the face of these dangers, we want to emphasize, and I share these words with many who have spoken before, UNRWA continues to be a lifeline for Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, while at the same time working diligently to resolve challenges to their operating environment. Monsieur le Président, nous saluons la...
President, we welcome the swift professional response of UNRWA and the United Nations to the recommendations contained in the Colonna report. Canada expects UNRWA to take all necessary measures to strengthen oversight, accountability and transparency. We are determined to ensure the implementation of the necessary reforms within the agency. We expect all UN agencies to respect the zero-tolerance policy of the United Nations when it comes to terrorism in all of its forms, as well as its neutrality. We recognize that this work is already ongoing in UNRWA and that the implementation of the recommendations in the Colonna report is continuing in spite of the fact that UNRWA is facing a chronic financial deficit. We will continue to work with UNRWA and with the broader United Nations on this issue. Like many others gathered here, Canada has signed the Common Engagement Letter, which is a clear commitment, shows our clear commitment in this area.
By the government of Israel with respect to the political activities of some involved in the past in the organization, we take these allegations seriously. We are pleased to see UNRWA's swift communications on the allegations, and we support the approach that's been outlined by the Commissioner General to engage Israel to seek further clarifications. We will continue to actively engage with UNRWA, the UN, and all donors on this matter, as well as look forward to further clarification from the government of Israel in this regard. But having said that, Mr. Chairman, I want to be very clear. We renewed our longstanding support to UNRWA, the core program, in 2023 with an announcement of $100 million over 4 years. We have also provided $21 million of additional humanitarian support throughout the current conflict, with another $25 million announced last month for the 2024 appeal for Gaza and the West Bank, bringing the total amount to $46 million. To those who say it's now the time to stop funding UNRWA, we can only respond by saying it is the clear conclusion of everyone who has studied and thought through this subject that no one can do the work that UNRWA is currently doing. No one else can substitute for UNRWA, and no one else can make up for what would be a humanitarian catastrophe if UNRWA were to cease doing the work that it is doing. The agency's work, together with the support that host governments provide, is essential for the well-being of millions, for regional stability, but also for the opportunities that adequate health care and education provide for millions of young people who are receiving those services, as well as millions of others. The truth is that UNRWA will remain essential until there is a clear pathway towards a future that meets the aspirations of Palestinians, Israelis, and countries in the region. That is precisely the future to which Canada is committed and which to which we believe all of us, all countries, should remain committed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia.
President, first I would like to thank the Secretary General for mobilizing international support to UNRWA and commend the Commissioner General Lazzarini for his leadership in providing non-stop essential aid to Palestinian refugees. UNRWA serves as a lifeline for millions of Palestinians. UNRWA staff pay with their own lives to provide essential assistance amid ongoing military actions. Yet despite its critical role, the agency faces underfunding, hindering its ability to deliver. Let me underline that Latvia has been a consistent supporter and donor to UNRWA activities. On top of our long-term financial commitment at the national level, as a member of the European Union, Latvia is also proud to be part of the biggest contributing party to UNRWA. Moreover, at times when UNRWA faces funding shortfalls, Latvia has provided additional financial resources and will continue to do so. There is no alternative for UNRWA, as it provides critical services and ensures the backbone of education, healthcare and social services to all Palestinians. That is why Latvia joined UNRWA shared commitments and thanks Jordan, Kuwait and Slovenia for this initiative. We commend the agency in implementing the recommendations outlined by the Independent Review Group's final report. This process should continue in a transparent and coherent way, upholding UNRWA's neutrality with our support. The dire situation in Gaza cannot be described in words. Palestinian people have been plunged into an abyss of suffering, people displaced, infrastructure destroyed, no safe space remaining, children killed and maimed. And for this reason, Latvia also joined the call for action for Palestinian children in the West Bank and Gaza. Immediate relief must be accompanied by peace-building and peacekeeping component. Latvia continues to contribute to the UN peacekeeping missions in the region, namely UNIFIL and UNSO. Yet Latvia recognizes that long-term peace is only achievable through a political process based on full implementation of all relevant UN Security Council resolutions. In particular, Resolution 2736 on a comprehensive ceasefire agreement securing immediate end of hostilities and release of all hostages. Each day of delay means more casualties, more suffering, more death. The Palestinian people have suffered too much long ago. The path towards a long-term political settlement should begin without a delay. In closing, let me reiterate Latvia's unwavering support to UNRWA. We call on the international community to join efforts in forging sustainable funding to continue UNRWA's critical mission, provide consistent lifeline to Palestinian people. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden, who will be the last speaker this morning. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President and Commissioner General, who have left the building right now. But anyway, we want to thank you for convening today's annual pledging conference. We want to thank all UNRWA staff for their continued work during an exceptionally challenging year and for their tireless commitments to deliver life-saving support. We underscore our deepest condolences for the more than 197 UNRWA staff members who have lost their lives, as well as the severe damage inflicted on UNRWA facilities and operations. Mr. President, the human suffering in Gaza is beyond words. Civilians need to be protected in line with the international humanitarian law. Humanitarian access must be scaled up and more efficient deconfliction mechanisms, as well as checkpoint procedures, are needed to allow for a sustainable flow of humanitarian aid. Sweden will also continue to advocate for that humanitarian staff and transports are allowed to move safely to deliver assistance in an effective, predictable and consistent way across all of Gaza. They are not and should never be a target. We are deeply concerned by the incitement against UNRWA in Israel and the attempts to undermine the work and credibility of the agency. We also express grave concern at the mounting number of access impediments and attempts to undermine the work of UNRWA, as well as other UN humanitarian workers. Humanitarian assistance must be allowed to reach those in need. UNRWA, like other UN and international organizations and diplomatic missions, need to be protected under international law, including the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations and international humanitarian law. Sweden condemns any attempt to label a UN agency as a terrorist organization. We welcome the swift action of UNRWA and the UN following the publication of allegations against some of its staff and the strong public commitment to fully implement the recommendations of the Colonna report. We welcome its key findings and that the agency acts consistent with the humanitarian principle of neutrality and request that UNRWA implement the recommendations. Since October last year, Sweden has increased its humanitarian assistance to Gaza by almost $50 million. This year, Sweden has made an initial contribution of $19 million in core funding to UNRWA and $3 million to UNRWA's flash appeals. Today, we can also announce that a decision has been made to proceed with a second disbursement of core funding to UNRWA of $9 million, following the agency's progress to further strengthen internal control and oversight mechanisms. Our core support to UNRWA comes in addition to Swedish core funding to all key humanitarian actors on the ground. Looking ahead, we must not lose sight of the need to address UNRWA's chronic financial difficulties more robustly and to proceed with necessary reforms. To ensure that UNRWA can continue its critical work to assist Palestinian refugees, UNRWA needs a sustainable and realistic budget where expenditure matches budget. We welcome UNRWA's efforts to seek solutions to the recurring financial crisis, including through broadening the donor base, and strongly encourage the agency to enhance these efforts. We are ready to support you in this work. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sweden. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we have heard the last speaker on the list for this morning. I do thank the interpreters for their flexibility. We will listen to the remaining delegations on the list of speakers this afternoon in this conference room at 3 p.m. The meeting is adjourned.